Tyler Henry, I have to say, firstly, thank you so much. I've been so excited for this conversation.
Likewise, I would not have missed it. I love getting to talk to you, and now in an official format.
And how are you doing?
I've been doing good. I've been staying busy. I've been on the road, traversing time zones, getting more bags under the eyes with jet lag. It's been good, though. Very productive.
Well, I was going to say you look very fresh, and actually, it was the first thing I said to you when the camera turned on. I was like, "You're looking very well, sir."
Thank you. We just do a bit of a lemon spritz and some pine spring water, and it just keeps one kind of just encrusted.
Like, I kind of feel like you're such a young guy, but yet I get the sense from following you and just even knowing you the little bit that I do that it feels like you've lived several lifetimes in one already.
That is very
Like,
kind. I when I was little, I felt like I was described as an old soul, and then the older I get, the younger I feel. So I'm like Benjamin buttoning it. I'm like reverse aging.
you are literally Benjamin Button, which brings us nicely along to the first question. Obviously, this show is all about the numbers, and I'm intrigued by numbers on so many levels. I think, people oftentimes when I say to people about this podcast being about numbers, they think numerology, which it may or may not be, but it's just about the fascination of numbers that appear in our lives. And I think once you tune into it, and I'm guessing that you're very in tune with numbers, it can be kind of mind boggling to see these kind of um, sequences of numbers that continually repeat in our lives. So when it comes
That's
to your family life, what is the number that speaks to you?
Yeah, I would say in regards to that, three is a pretty significant number because it is my immediate family, my mom, my dad, and myself. I'm an only child, get all the Christmas gifts every Christmas, just how I like it. And so for that, it's actually interesting. I think my birth number within numerology is three as well. So there's something to be said about that number kind of repeating in an archetypal way as far as family goes. And to your point, I mean, we can talk about this more, but there's definitely something about numbers being qualitative, or rather, let me restate, there's something about numbers being quantitative and kind of the nature of intuition being qualitative. And it's interesting. There are definitely different ways of measuring, the world.
Well, the first thing I think of when you tell me that your number is three in terms of your family is I think of like, you know, the trilogy, right? The Holy
It's,
Trinity, a three-leafed clover. Like
yes,
things that come in threes are associated down through the ages with this kind of mythical quality in many respects. It's seen as lucky, right?
yes, absolutely. And omens, things coming in threes, every time we get an elderly celebrity passing, everyone's looking up the and seeing everyone past 80 and is like, okay, is this Betty White's year? It was.
Oh, Betty
It
White,
was.
R.I.P.
No,
Betty.
I know. But they say it happens in threes.
It does. Well, let's hope. Are we due anyone to pass at the moment?
I mean, I hope
Anyone?
that would be, if I could call that one, we'd be in trouble.
So come here, talk to me about growing up and being an only child and obviously discovering. I think you said you were 10 when you discovered that you something was going on.
Yes. So that was really kind of the moment that started everything. I had the first premonition of my grandmother's passing, and that really kind of just kicked everything off. It for me was a moment of knowingness that evolved into a series of moments of knowingness. And I found that really between the ages of 10 and 13, as I was developing a sense of identity and growing into a person, that kind of corresponded with an intuitive development. And it seemed as if the more I developed my inner world, the more I was able to kind of retain the outer world. And that happened as I got older.
And so the first time it happens, like, were you not freaked out?
I definitely was more confused. And, if anything, I wasn't frightened until people told me that I was doing something worth being afraid of. As a kid, I would just have these experiences and they were very natural, but people framed them as supernatural or paranormal. And for me, they were very normal. So there was something to be said about wanting to keep things secret and having to integrate that element into my identity and kind of wear something as a badge of honor that I had been inclined to keep repressed. And it was a very powerful alchemy that was made of something very, very heavy.
I'm thinking about my own life when I was that age, when I was, especially 13, 14, that coming of age. And personally, I was, I didn't have an ability that I'd come to terms with. I was coming to terms with my sexuality, who my identity as an individual. And it was so, for me, it was quite traumatic is probably the wrong word, but it was very, very intense and it was a very difficult couple of years. So I'm only imagining that coupled with the fact that you are having these communications. I don't know
Sure.
what way. Yeah, like
It's a great way to
how do
put it. Yes.
how do because I struggled even just dealing with me,
Sure.
whereas you were dealing with other stuff on top of you, on top of having an ability that made you stand out for other reasons. How did you cope?
Sure. I think I kind of checked a number of boxes, it being that where I was from, I just kind of differed in a number of ways. And in some ways, it made it easier to be truer to who I was because I was dealing with something that was so other that, being gay on top of being a medium wasn't really that. Being an other, it wasn't that hard to embrace otherhood in other capacities. But I find
Mm.
that really generally, whether even if someone can't relate to being a medium or having moments of communication, I think everyone can relate to feeling like the other in one way or another, be it in the
Mhm.
workplace, be it at school. And so those are, for me, I think, opportunities for resilience to be true to who one is. And I just always felt like I had a pretty identifiable sense of self. And I think that helped.
Mhm.
It just kind of came naturally. So
What was coming out like for you as a gay person?
well, coming out as a gay was just for me a process of many coming outs. I felt like it was kind
Hmm.
of busting out of the closet and kind of getting slammed back in and then busting out. And they're like, no, it's a phase. And I'm like, what? So it was a lot of, kind of having to repeat. Like, I swear I'm gay. I really don't want to have to prove it to you.
But were your family like receptive of it? Was it like a non-issue?
It was kind of more like, no, just give it some more time, feel it out. You've had girlfriends, feel it out, and I'm like, no, we've been down those paths and birth canals, and we're good, and seen it, done it, watched the movie. So
You're
I,
like,
yeah,
I definitely felt it out, and I'm a gay.
yeah, and then it was just it's a really long phase that's stuck now for over a decade, or well, now going on two, if I'm being honest.
Oh, there you go. Well, looking as young as ever, that Benjamin Button is working for you.
It's the goal. I'm getting older. Next time we talk, I'm just gonna be hi.
But do you like? I've heard you speak in interviews before about the fact when you give readings that it does take a lot out of you. Like it takes a toll. I've watched, and obviously your Netflix show Life After Death. There's a scene where you're in bed and you're like, I just want to stay in bed all day. I'm
Yeah,
exhausted. Do you
absolutely.
feel is there a cost in every reading for you?
For sure. I think, one of the biggest sacrifices that we all make is our time. And I think that for me, there's something to be said about that in the sense that not only does a reading start when I sit down with a person, but it starts long before and the night before. And sometimes, there are very strong impressions and dreams or insomnia. And then, the information often sticks with me thereafter. When I go and lay my head on the pillow that night after I've done a reading, I find myself still thinking about the person or thinking of, the impact that the individual had in the person's life. And so I would say the cost is that, but it's a cost, worth having. It's a price worth paying, tenfold for what I'm able to achieve in that moment of connection, and it makes it very much worth it.
Was there ever a moment in your life, and again, I'm kind of pulling on my own experience here. When I first came out as gay, I was like, if I'm being totally honest, and it feels like such a betrayal of who I am today to even say this, but it's just being completely honest. There was a moment in time where if I could have made a wish and woke up the next day and being completely straight, I would have done it because it felt like the path of least resistance. In terms of, you having this amazing um ability, was there ever a time where you struggled with it and you kind of thought, you know what, I just want to give this back?
Of course, I think that is one of the aspects of having something about one that makes one unique, as we all have. And there are times where even if you're the biggest, juiciest peach, you're going to deal with people who just don't like peaches fundamentally. And that's just the nature of being a human being. But children don't quite realize that. When you're a kid, you can't really integrate that understanding as well as perhaps an adult can. And so there were certainly moments, as I'm sure you can relate, where it felt easier to be quiet than to be true to who one
Hmm.
was. And in my case, I had people having prayer circles for my soul as 11, 12-year old. As I got older, I dealt with a lot of resistance within the school setting and had to leave school early. So those were all for me tests. I think that in some ways, tension is the price of growth. And if you think of quite literally, a seed that's planted that must go up through the soil to reach the sky, there's tension bearing down on it, but it goes up anyway, pursues its ultimate path. And so that for me is what challenges to our identity are, opportunities to rise to the occasion. But knowing that and believing that can be two different things.
And where do you think that resilience comes from for you?
I don't know. I think I might have just had a really like maybe the past life was just really rough or something. I've always been very jovial. I deal really well with tough situations because I generally am able to maintain a level head. If I hadn't been a medium, I would have wanted to be a diplomat, just because I
Ah.
find international relations really fascinating. I find communication just so integral, and how everybody just wants to be seen and feel understood, and that's universal. That transcends language and even life and death.
I think that's something that we share in the sense of, that I'm only getting to know you, but you seem to have, like me, and I feel very lucky to be able to say this, a naturally happy disposition, and my mom says to me, and she always says it, she goes, as a young boy, I just bounced around the place happy. As long as I was fed, as long as there was trees for me to climb and animals for me
Yes,
to find, like I was just happy. I was just a happy
yes,
boy.
yes. What a
You know,
gift.
yeah, do you think, and obviously as you get older and I feel you've got different insights into all of this, right, with your ability. Do you think that that's something that people can learn? And obviously it gets challenged as you get older and life gets in the way and things get thrown your way. But I oftentimes think that if the world could tap into that, we'd all be in such a better place.
There really is something to be said about pain thresholds and tolerance thresholds when it comes to difficult experiences. And some people seem to have an inner resilience, and others, feel everything so much. And it's very interesting. I remember when I graduated high school at the age of 16, I wanted to become a hospice nurse. And in one of the classes we took, we learned about the pain scale and how very often that's related to being a 1 or a 10, or in anything in between, and how pain was often so subjective. It often very much tied into the amount of distress someone was in emotionally. And that always fascinated me. And I think clearly reflects the subjective nature of what we are able to tolerate. And I think we all can do things to find an inner sense of stability, to build certain tools to self regulate, which I think is really important, and cope with life through expectation management. I think that that's a very integral part of being able to navigate the realm of this world.
And how much do you think of our current, like our personality in this life, is is built on the experiences we may have had prior?
So interesting and such a fascinating line of inquiry because I truly don't know. And I have met people who have had hangups that they attribute to past lives where it certainly was still a problem for them. And
Mm,
those are some of those interesting cases, and then we have people who
hmm
feel absolutely categorically no connection to a past life, or anything of that sort. So it seems to just be a bit of a spectrum, like most
Because for
things.
me, I'll be honest, I don't feel any connection to a past life per se,
Yeah.
but I do feel a very strong connection to the people who have come before me. So, in the sense of, there's that phrase, I think it's Maya Angelou, we're all standing on the shoulders of those who've come before us. And that really resonates with me.
Yes. Absolutely. That's you said it. I mean, that truly sums it up, and the opportunity there to connect with our ancestors and those that came
Mm.
before us. All of those chance encounters that had to happen in order for your creation to be possible over hundreds, thousands of years. Something informed that, and I really think there's a greater kind of plan to things.
Do you think? Yeah, I often wonder, I'm like, you know, I believe in free will, and we're all on this planet with our own free will. But then I also believe in destiny. And then I'm like, well, what is the intersection between destiny and free will? Do you have any insights into that or any take on that?
Oh, it's such a good conversation because I go back and forth as well, especially in the realm of psychic work where we talk about predetermination. And if one can even, in theory, one time accurately psychically predict the future, well, then very clearly the future is capable of communicating with the past. And that's how one would be able to intuit something that hasn't happened yet, right? And so it becomes very convoluted, very confusing. I think that there is something to be said on both sides of the argument. And I think life may be an amalgamation of certain predetermined standards or stages that are set with a variable of free will within it. If that's the case, then we are also kind of subject to other people's free will as well. And that would take away, in essence, some of our free will. So if you can kind of understand, it would all be kind of smashing in a bunch of forces. And the truth might just kind of be somewhere in the middle of that convolution.
Uh-huh. Now you mentioned something there as well. So obviously you are a medium clairvoyant, um, not a psychic. So what is, or are you a psychic? I mean, I
You
don't know. I'm wondering what the difference
know,
is.
No, it's in that when it comes to the subject, I think mediumship is a psychic ability, but not all psychics are mediums. So it's a mind power, but mediums are really more conduits for people who have passed away or
Uh-huh.
disembodied intelligences, guides. So often they're called. So there's a differential there, but it's
Ha-
all to me the same realm, and I'm still considered a psychic, even if I'm not looking into a crystal ball, which hey, I have before.
have you?
Yeah, and it's a form of scrying. It's something that's gone back thousands of years. You could look at a mirror. Some people look at candle flames. There's so many just different ways of thinking and shifting one's mindset.
And because I know you love stained glass and rocks, right? Like interesting rocks. I see that on your
Ooh,
socials.
yes, and more of a geological nerd than any metaphysical aspect to it. But I just love natural beauty, which in LA is hard to find. You can
Oh,
smell.
I'm
You can
struggling to
smell.
find that natural beauty, honey.
Oh, it's natural beauty. I'm sorry. Oh, my toupee almost fell off. No, but truly, it's something truly transcendent when you can look at something from the earth and realize you came from the same source. It's truly magnificent.
You know what? That's so interesting. I had a phone call with one of my really great friends back in Ireland about an hour ago, Jennifer. And halfway through the phone call, because I was in the garden here, she said to me, I can hear loads of birds in the background. Where are you? And I said, I'm in the garden, and that's one of the things I love about Los Angeles is you can actually really connect with nature. And standing out here, and I'm in the heart of West Hollywood, I look up into the sky and I see these beautiful birds of prey, like catching those thermals and just riding around. And then I look at the hummingbirds and they're doing their little love bombing dance, and I'm just like, it really like
Yes.
fills me up with so much happiness.
Oh, absolutely. I know in West Hollywood there's so much nature and animal. You've got bears and otters, and just an amalgam. You just never know what you're gonna run into on some.
It's so true. Yeah, and there's plenty of peaches. I know you mentioned peaches
There
earlier
is
on. There's
all
all
the
of it,
fruits. All the fruits are in West Hollywood.
and vegetables. You
With
said that
what?
you got to have your five a day. Isn't that what they say? It's good for your health.
That can be your quota.
You mentioned a little earlier that you were looking at nursing. Was it nursing was your
That's
career
right.
choice? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So in terms of the number that changed everything for you in your career, what is it?
I forgot the answer that I had established earlier. I can maybe mind read it from you. But I would say around 19 was probably a pivotal age because that was really when I first kind of established my television show. I had brain surgery at 18 after having an arachnoid brain cyst. I almost died. And that experience, while extremely humbling, was extremely timely and really put me in a place of having to reassess as I was turning into an adult, literally, where I wanted my future life to go, and realized through that experience that time was of the essence.
And so hold on, is that when you had the brain surgery, had that any connection to your ability?
I wondered. There was a congenital brain cyst, so it was something I was born with. But after surgery, I remember when I was woken up by the nurse who woke me up, I felt a presence around her. Oh my goodness, sorry. Goodness gracious, let me re-answer that one before my throat closes. I remember when
Are
I
you okay?
woke up out of brain surgery, I recall actually getting a feeling around the nurse that was waking me up. And so I knew I still had my ability, that I hadn't lost it, from the swipe of a scalpel. But it was a very real risk and something I considered as I got wheeled in.
And so you wake up from successful brain surgery. You're still the same person you were the day before, but obviously in better health. How does that change your view on life and how you, I guess, set your intentions on what you wanted to achieve?
Sure. I think it certainly was a reminder that time is of the essence, that life is fickle and fragile, and that expectations can really lead to disappointment. So for me, it was not wanting to live in a world of expectation, but to live in a world of creation. To try to create as much as I could before my time came to leave this realm. And one of the interesting things about this brain cyst is that it wasn't entirely taken out. It was in a very sensitive part of my brain, near my brainstem, and it was basically covering three very pivotal parts where your brain and brainstem drain. And at any moment, that could rupture. And I was told, this is something you're going to live with for the rest of your life, with the understanding that it could come back at any time. And that understanding quite literally helped me navigate life differently, knowing it could change in a blink.
And it's quite interesting to hear that because obviously you have a rather unique insight into life after death, into what happens us when we die. And so to hear you say that is really interesting for me. What do you think happens when we die?
It's the
Do you
age old
know?
question, and it's one I have so little knowledge around, but from
Mm.
what I can determine, there is something about the experience that seems to be deeply introspective. Across the thousands of readings that I've done, they've came through and explained that in essence, to convey certain understandings that they have there to me would be like trying to explain arithmetic to a squirrel. I am simply not capable of grasping, some of the greatest answers to the biggest questions, nor do I think any of us are on some level. But what is so interesting is there seems to be a reflection of a life review process. There seems to be an awareness of the ripple effect that a person's life had on others, what the actions and inactions had on the greater collective. And when they come through, they really recognize that they were like a droplet of water that, upon transitioning, become part of a large, vast ocean of consciousness. And that realization is humbling. It allows people to let things go and to come through with peace through acceptance. And that's the key word, acceptance.
It's interesting there. I was just thinking about, you were saying you wake up after brain surgery and it really helps you focus on what you want to do in this life. So, oftentimes grief is associated with regret, right? People regret the things they didn't do or they did do or they didn't say and so on. I'm curious, with the people or the souls or spirits that you connect with in the afterlife, do you ever get a sense of regret from them?
I think if anything, they have awareness of what was done, what could have been done differently. I think of a lot of what we identify with the ego. Um, very often related to either expectations imposed on ourselves or the way things
Hmm.
should be. A lot of that kind of gets stripped when we transition. We no longer need those necessary defense mechanisms that we have in this realm. And so I think there is a reckoning. I think when people hurt people, they get a full understanding upon transitioning of the ripple effect of their actions, not coming from a place of punishment, but coming from a place of self awareness and the expansion of understanding and self assessment. And that really seems to give people clarity. But regret seems to be more human.
So interesting because I was brought up in Ireland, Catholic. We're not particularly religious family. Um, and I remember one of the kind of core tenets of it was that God will always forgive you, right?
Sure.
Repent your sins and God will always forgive you. And I remember when I was coming out and I'm like, well, apparently I'm an abomination, I'm a sin because I'm homosexual. But I'm like, if God's going to forgive me, well, then what are you guys talking about? Like, and what's there to
Right.
forgive? I'm a good person. I'm living my life with good intentions. I'm a good person. And
Sure.
so when you think about that, and then so that's one thing. And then I remember listening to an interview I think Oprah Winfrey did with some guy who survived the plane crash. And it was this thing of he wasn't meant to get on the plane, but he got on it and he didn't listen to that intuition or whatever was telling him not to get on it. And I remember he says, as the plane was like on fire and it was crashing, and thankfully for him, he was up near the front. He turned around and he said he was non-believer, non-spiritual, non-religious. He turned around and looked into the cabin before he exited. And he said he saw what he could only describe as lights coming out of the people who were still strapped into the plane. But he described the lights as some were brighter than others,
Wow.
right? And so he now lives his life. He doesn't understand it, but he said, I now live my life. I want to be one of the brighter lights when my time comes.
It's
Which
beautiful.
brings me to my question, though. And again, you mightn't have the answer to this. I'm just curious. Are there better lights or souls than others? Like, I don't know. It confuses me.
Well, it's a great philosophical question, right? I mean, you have people who do horrible things on a large scale, and then you have people who do great things on a large scale as well. And then certainly, how can both of those be the same fundamentally? And then that's kind of the
Yeah.
age old question. I do think, if anything, the soul is a bit like a canvas, and our decisions are ultimately, what we choose to paint, what picture we choose to wear on our personhood, what portrait do we choose uh, to show off to the world for people to look at and take something from. We all are given some degree of choice. And when we talk about the subject of God, there are huge philosophical questions around that. The problem of evil is something that is worth looking into. It's literally within philosophy, the concept of how can a God who is loving create and permit evil to occur?
Hmm.
Those two don't also seem to contradict, right? So it's something that even goes above our pay grade as human beings.
Mm. It's so interesting, isn't it? I mean, we could talk about it for hours. Are
So
you afraid
interesting.
of dying?
I still look both ways when I cross the street, but when it happens, it'll happen. And I recognize full well, it is kind of beyond my control. So I suppose I just kind of feel like one is in an eternal present, and
Uh-huh.
that present for me is priority, and I don't really get lost in the future or focus much on the past even.
Well, that's something we all need to practice, isn't it? It's like being present in the moment.
Yeah, and it's a fine line, right? You want to be able to be introspective and plan for next week, but you also, I think most people don't have problems with that. I think most people over introspect and over plan. It's really about being able to be present. I think can really radically change your life. Most of us are good
And
in
do
the
you
other regards.
do you have any kind of practices that you do on a daily or weekly basis that helps you kind of maintain that and helps you maintain your sense of self? Because I'm assuming you're constantly being barraged by spirits trying to connect with you.
Totally. In some ways or another, yeah. I would say like doing things that cultivate identity are really important. Things that get one into a flow state. A flow state
Yeah.
is really just defined as, in Taoism, this idea that we can do things where time seems to pass as if it does not exist. And you can
Love
think
that.
of dancers, singers interviewing sometimes. I'm sure feels that way, where you look and you're like, oh my God, the interview is over already. We have to do
Uh-huh.
those things that get us into those states where we are aware of our spiritual, eternal nature that really transcends time. And things that get us in our flow state really get us literally in the flow.
I love it. There's no better feeling than when you feel in flow in life.
Absolutely. The fluidity is so important to have. And just generally, I find rigidity is kind of the enemy.
I mean, that's something that I work on myself because I'm a Capricorn. Not huge into
Me too.
horoscopes, but oh, that's why I'm
Oh,
getting a lot of this. A lot of what you're saying, I can relate to in the sense of I don't
yeah.
have your ability, but I just your outlook on life.
Yes, well, I love it. We're both honoring,
Oh yeah,
capricious.
we're capricious. So hold on, what's your date of birth?
January 13th. What about you?
Oh my God, I'm getting chills. I'm the 12th.
Oh, no way. Our
Yeah.
cycle's the same. Oh my God, our periods are going to be the same for the next 6 months.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. Yeah,
You see.
because I was going to say there was something you said earlier on, or one of your I was going to say, God, that's very Capricorn, and I
Yeah,
almost didn't want to go there, but yeah, we're both Capricorn. That's so
there you go.
interesting,
Absolutely. That is meant to be.
isn't it? Oh my God, I love it. Okay. Oh my God. Well, then this next question is going to be so interesting. Now,
Ready.
when it comes to love, what's your
Yes.
number?
My number, 21. And that's, when I started my long-term relationship that I've now been in for 100 years. And and looking to get married here very soon. So I'm very excited about that.
You're getting
And
married?
I am, yeah, it's going to happen at some point in the next 24 months. I'm just working out the logistics.
Oh wow, I
So,
did not
you know,
know.
yeah,
Congratulations. That's obviously the lovely
thanks.
Clint.
Yes, lovely Clint. Can you imagine if it was like, no, it's not Clint, it's someone else. It's a woman. Can
It's a
you
woman.
imagine? Just completely deadpan.
Hold
Stranger
on, I
things have
actually I like Stranger. Listen, who are you telling? Yes, stranger things have happened. Um, I actually, you've reminded me now. I heard a beautiful song that yourself and Clint. I'm not sure who wrote it, but you recorded this beautiful song. Did Clint write it?
we wrote it together, and he has a little bit of a better, more angelic voice. I've got the lower octaves, the lower realms covered, but together, yeah, we wrote the song about grief. It's called "Together Again," and it was just kind of one of those channeled works. It just kind of comes out of you.
I listened to it earlier on this week, and it brought me to tears. Even the
Oh,
first 20 seconds. I don't know what it
thank
was
you.
about it. There's something about it. The melody, the tone, there's quite an intensity to
Thank
it, and I'm very susceptible to music. It's it's when I think I go to my most kind of relaxed, vulnerable state almost,
you.
and instantly it can trigger me. But this was beautiful. It's a beautiful reaction.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it was really beautiful. So you and
So
Clint, okay,
thank you. I
go
really
ahead.
appreciate it. It means everything because feeling is where it's at, right? And whether it's
Mm,
tears, it's all a release. It's all about being able to just go with the flow and let it be free.
hmm Yeah, I know. I used to, for a long time I struggled to cry. For a
Really?
long time,
What do you
yeah,
attribute that to?
I'm sorry.
What do you attribute that to?
I think, and I've done, I've spoken a lot about this, and I've really confronted it head on. And I attribute it to a defense mechanism that I developed when I was coming to terms with who I am as a gay person. I got quite bullied in school, and I literally, it's like I describe it like an X-Man. I can feel my emotions rising, and I can just stop it right there. It's like I build a wall, and I can stop it. And it's been really interesting to explore because I don't want to live like that, because I remember as a kid, just again, very, very in flow. That's the only way I can describe it. Very light and enjoyable, and just kind of in tune with who I was. And my group of girlfriends, who are still my best friends to this day, we all met when we were like 13, 14, through my ex-girlfriend, actually. And there's 6 or 7 in the group. And I remember they only said it to me years later. When we were 15, 16, 17, whenever I would be in a conversation with them, I apparently would place my hand on their stomach. And I had no idea I ever did this, right? And I remember someone said it, they were like, "Oh, we used to always breathe in when we were talking to you because we didn't want you feeling or whatever." I was like, "Oh my God, I was totally unaware of that." But so anyway, I've dealt with that now, and I'm much more my emotions and crying and all of that is much more. I'm much more in tune with myself. It took a long time.
Yes. It
It took a
really
long
takes
time.
work. They say when it comes to love, it's less about finding it and more about removing the blocks that prevent you from feeling it. And it's so
Mm-hmm.
true with just empathy for oneself. We're so inclined to feel compassion for a friend, but not lend ourselves that same, honor, that same kind of just due diligence, basic respect for ourselves. But it takes time. I think the amygdala has to grow. Got to get that full, frontal lobe has to develop before we can kind of fully integrate some of those understandings.
Do you know what's? I'm just reminded now while we're talking. I was in Mykonos, in Santorini, a couple of years ago, and I think it was probably the most surreal soul experience I ever had. And I've never shared this publicly, but I was in this bar, and I remember I'd gone into this bar and we'd gone in earlier on the day, and I had just noticed this tall blonde lady behind the bar, paid no attention, and went and sat where I was sitting out in the terrace. And there was like a group of us, so people were buying drinks, and I didn't have to go to the bar for at least an hour and a half. So when it was my turn to go to the bar, she came up and said, "Hi, how can I help you?" And I said, "Oh, no." She said, "Hi, welcome." And I said, "Oh, thank you." I said, "I've actually been here for a couple of hours." She goes, "Oh, yes, I know. I spotted you when you came in." Right? And I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, great. This place is great." Anyway, we get talking, and I said she was this American lady, and she'd been living in Santorini for 10 years. And I said, "How did you end up in Santorini? For so long?" She told me the story of um, she'd come there, met her husband, fell in love, they had kids, and he'd passed away, and that was their bar. So she still has the bar. And I was like, wow. And I was so drawn to her stomach, right? And she was wearing this little t-shirt and there was like a logo in the center of her stomach. And I said, "Oh," and I just put my hand on it and I said, "I know this sounds weird to say, but like I feel he's still really here with you," because the conversation had gone in a weird way. And she said, "Oh
Hmm.
my God, thank you so much." She said, "This is his t-shirt that she was
Yes.
wearing." I was like,
Yeah.
"Oh my God," right?
Yes.
So we then continued the conversation for like an hour and a half. The bar closed. I could not get away from this lady in the best way. I went home to the hotel, and Tyler, I cried for 3 hours, but it was tears of joy. It was euphoric. It was
Yes.
like I had a moment where I said, if just like if it's over now, this is fine. I'm very happy. It was the most bizarre thing.
Beautiful. That sounds like they clearly, whoever they were, perhaps her husband was aware of that kind of synchronous meeting of the minds in that space and in that time. And I think there really is something about meaningful coincidences that people need to give more credit. Your
Mm.
inclination to put your hand on her belly, to point out that specific region, I think was not accidental. And there's a reason you were kind of used as a conduit to relay a message of knowingness that he is still there.
Yeah, it really stuck with me, that experience from a few years ago. Um, anyway,
Powerful.
I kind of feel like we touched on this next one. It's about like age, not it's nothing but a number. What's
Yeah.
the age that is significant for you? What
Yes.
number?
A zero. I remember, not that I remember being in the embryo, but I'm sure it was warm and probably very relaxing. Didn't have to work, no live events, was just chilling, and then popped out about 3 months early, and looked back and said, "I'm never going in one of those ever again."
Were you
So
born 3 months
zero.
early?
I was about approximately, yes, and just came out like a little beanbag, just popped out of there like a chicken nugget, undercooked.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's quite early, isn't it? That's quite
it
premature.
is. Yeah, they had to like do the cesarean. I was like a tumor baby. They just kind of like extracted me.
No, no, I know you kind of say it jokingly, But do you have a memory of being in the womb?
Oh, no, no. Yeah, if I did, I think
Okay.
I'd be even more on the Kinsey scale.
Okay. I was like, I mean, you can communicate with people who've passed on. So I mean, I don't know. I'm not taking anything for granted.
Anything's free game. I could start levitating. You could start levitating. Anything could happen around here.
I'm all up for it. Oh, do you know what? Something I was going to ask you in terms of your relationship. Do you guys ever consider yourselves or see yourselves having children?
You know, no, only because we are both so nocturnal that having to get up for school would drive me crazy, and I could barely get through it the first time, let alone having to relive all that, and then having to go to PTA meetings, wanting to punch other parents. And then also, if I have a baby, then I no longer am the baby. So who's going to change my diaper? So it's just unacceptable. We can't have it, and I'm just gonna live, yeah, without. Yeah, no, no kids.
No kids. I love it. I love it. Well, listen, at least you're very definite on that front.
Yes, yes, concrete.
Very concrete. I sense that from you. There's no ambiguity there. And in terms of your own personal life journey, is there a number that you wish you could forget?
It's a number I wish I could forget. I really think every number has had value, no matter
Hmm.
what it's worth.
No, but sometimes it could be, it could be the number of an ex. It could be.
Yeah. Oh, geez, what, 32 when I was 19? That might be the number we forget. Yeah, there you go.
Is there a number that you check regularly?
You know what? I find myself noticing sevens a lot. I just kind of see them. It's not like it's like a lucky. I mean, everyone's lucky number is seven, okay, but like I don't know. I just see them. I'm like, oh hey, look, it's a seven.
I Well, I've identified some seven as my number,
Yeah.
and I always had an affinity with seven when I was growing up. Seriously,
Yes.
when I was like, oh yeah, seven, lucky number, lucky number.
Yeah.
But then when I look back on my life has gone in cycles of seven. Every
Oh, I
seven
believe
years,
it.
something very key has happened to me.
Absolutely. Oh yes. Even
Um,
it's so fascinating in those increments. Yeah, I was just having this conversation. Even within astrology, like when you hit around 27 or 28, you kind of enter into a whole other phase of your life. And even in other some kind of more Norwegian cultures, they kind of separate life into four parts, like the four seasons, and it kind of goes
uh-huh.
in those categories. So it's very interesting.
Have you ever been to Ireland?
I never have. You'll have to take me.
Oh my
Just
God,
take me.
yes! Just take you to Ireland.
Just
Let's just
take me.
elope and run. We can run away to Ireland. I'd be intrigued to see how you
Yeah.
get on. I mean, I'm sure Ireland would love you, but it's
I,
obviously
I,
it's a
yes.
very very kind of historic and ancient land with lots of very old history.
Yes, I would love in person someday. We'll discuss the Fae folk. We'll talk about them all. A very fascinating history there.
There is, isn't there?
Oh yeah.
Do you how much do you believe that life is about timing?
I think timing truly is everything. There's something to be said about striking while the iron is hot. I love that phrase because it's such a good visual and it's so true. And really taking opportunity when it presents itself. I think oftentimes, and people I know, self doubt has really been the biggest cause of stagnance. So acting, even if you don't fully believe in your ability to follow through, don't let yourself get in your own way. That would be my biggest encouragement to people. Strike while the iron's
That's
hot.
that's really interesting because I imagine a lot of people seek your help when they're in those periods of obviously grief, but also self doubt.
Yes, liminal periods of transition, be it inward or outward. So whether someone's starting college or grieving the death of a loved one, people find themselves kind of looking for objective, sources of guidance and can find subjective meaning. I think through readings.
I went down a rabbit hole not so long ago, probably about 6 months ago, of watching these near death experience videos on YouTube.
Oh yes,
And I found them fascinating. And there was one gentleman in particular, I just thought how he communicated the whole sequence of events really resonated. And he was this young man. He was out in a lake. He found himself at the bottom of the lake, and he describes his experience. How, do you have any thoughts on that? Because obviously you're dealing with people who've already passed,
sure.
typically.
Yes, Dr. Raymond Moody wrote extensively about near-death experiences and actually coined the phrase NDE. And he, for the listeners, I think is a really great resource for that subject because he noted the cultural parallels across all cultures, unrelated to one another, so often reported an overwhelming sense of peace, a feeling of looking over one's body, oftentimes describing either a light or a tunnel or a passage, something that generally symbolized a transition state. So think even sometimes a bridge people have
Mm.
seen. And so it's heavily symbolic, but these kind of commonalities seem to speak to some wider experience that we all will go through in some way. And one thinks, hey, maybe just as we leave the birth canal, we enter into another canal of sorts, perhaps quite literally.
And do you think like reincarnation is that something that you believe in?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you are dealing with an eternal soul and a consciousness that is eternal, you're going to have iterations within that consciousness, chapters almost like in an endless book. And so, therefore, would have, different lives or chapters.
Would you describe yourself as an easy person to live with?
I think I'm very easygoing. I would date me personally. I feel like no, I'm, no, I am pretty mellow. I am. I like to just work hard and be on time. And yes,
Because I'm trying to get into that place where I'm like, how do you detach from such a, what you do is very highly emotional, and you're going into a different state, right? That's my understanding of it when you're connecting. So when you're on your downtime, like, how do you switch off and how do you like mellow out and just
I
be
would
be Tyler?
I would say having non-professional applications of intuition, so creativity being one of the biggest. I think we are all here to create in some form or another, and to, through the process of living, be more of ourselves. And so for me, when I'm not working, I cultivate other kind of creative habits. I make stained glass windows. Clint and I make music, which you so kindly
Mm-hmm.
mentioned.
Loved
And
it.
those are all outlets that require one to kind of know when to start and where to stop. And that is a very intuitive, feeling based process that, when applied in that way, can be rejuvenating.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any other like do you meditate? Do you do yoga? Do you do therapy? Like, I'm just wondering how you take care of you.
I definitely need more therapy, that's for sure. But as far as meditation and yoga goes, they say charity starts at home. My family knows.
Well, listen, that's
I
it.
That's right. I find it more of a lifestyle of just trying to take those moments when they present themselves to have little glimmers of stability,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to appreciate a sunset, to never lose sight of the air, in the morning when it's crisp, and to never trivialize that.
Mm-hmm. It's nice to have a body that works, isn't it? Like to get up every
It
morning and
really,
get out of bed and go, oh, I'm alive.
it's
It's another day.
I think what I will miss most about this body when I'm gone some days is the aspect of touch. There's something so beautiful that we take for granted of our hands, and to be able to feel, a warm blanket or a cold drink. There's just something about it that is very tangible.
Speaking of, what's your guilty pleasure?
Guilty pleasure, I didn't even have an answer. Larry King asked me that once, and I said popcorn. So I can't give you much of a better answer than that.
Fair enough. Popcorn, whatever floats your boat. Last question.
Yeah.
What is what is your mission in life? You help people, but what's your ultimate purpose?
My ultimate purpose, I hope, is remembered as just someone who tried to connect people, to be able to contribute to a conversation, to help facilitate topics that people generally don't want to talk about. And if people can do that and live more mindfully as a result of those conversations, then I have done my job. And that transcends belief.
I love that. Well, Tyler, it's been an absolute joy on every level. Thank you so much
Thank
for your time. You're a busy man, so I
you.
appreciate it. And it's been a fascinating conversation for me. And I know my audience are going to absolutely love it.
Likewise. And we will be in touch soon. I can't wait to do this
Me
again.
too.